Welcome back to Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we're going to have a one-word deviation today that I think will make all the difference in the world, and it is the word have versus the word get. And this is something that you practice on a regular basis in reshaping the way that you talk about things that we get to do versus things that we have to do. And so as we get curious today about can one word really make a difference, I think you've got a pretty clear answer to that.
Well, yes, and I think it's a broader. That is a small example of a broader strategy, and that is reframing things in our minds. We've talked a little bit about paradigm shifts. We've talked a little bit about our approach and our motivation, attitude toward things. Well, a lot of that comes from our own self-talk, and a lot of it comes from the way we relate to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned many years ago, someone said, you don't have to do anything. You get to do that. And it's like, what do you mean I get to do that? No, I have to. No, you want the consequence of doing it. And so you get to have that consequence if you do it, but you don't have to do anything. You could lay around bed all day and somebody would come and feed you in this world today, right?
Yeah.
And so, so the point is, the language is important, and my kids were tired of hearing that growing up. It's like, well, I have to go to school today, or I have to go to baseball practice. No, you don't have to go to baseball practice. If you want the consequence of being able to play to the game next week, you need to go to practice. You want that consequence, you should go, and you get to go. And the other part of that is, I have to fix my car, or I have to fix my roof, or I have to, we get to do those things. We have a car, we have a house.
That's true.
And I think perspective and language is important in that matter.
So while you were talking, I instantly think to one of the chores at our house that if I were to say, hey, you get to go pick up in the backyard after the dogs, I cannot imagine there being a less than smart aleck response to that. There are tasks that it's really hard to see the silver lining in it, right? There's some menial tasks, some gross tasks, some just things that we are responsible for in our day-to-day that it's really hard to convert the have to a get to mentality.
It is, but my goodness, picking up after the dog is a get to because you get to have a dog. I mean, I guess to me, and maybe it's just because I've used it so long, it's just easy for me to see the example, but and by the way, there's going to be things that you get to do as part of your 70-30, right? The thing, we should be concentrating on doing as much as possible to contribute to the world per our strengths and per the things we can do. But in order to get to do those things, we sometimes have to do the paperwork, so to speak. In my life, the worst thing in the world is the paperwork. And I get unduly upset. I was talking to my accountant today, and they sent me a paper bill in the snail mail. In today's world, those things it's like, really? So I open it up and it's past due. So I call up and I say, hey, can I pay this by credit card? No, we don't do credit cards. And it's like, so I'm sorry, but my system isn't like set up to go and get a checkbook, write out a check and bring it to you. But I get to do that. I mean, I get to have the situation where I get to have an accountant do my taxes so that I know they're right, because I know I wouldn't do them properly and mine are complicated. And so, that's not I could get very frustrated with that.
Sure.
And say, well, so now I have to do this and I have to find an envelope and a stamp. I mean, these are minor things compared to what people have to deal with.
Well, so is it constantly backtracking to a point where you can find that moment of gratitude? So you're saying letter and stamp, and I don't know why, but I'm instantly thinking of the people in Ukraine right now and how difficult it must be to have any type of consistent correspondence, especially if you've got family in other countries, or if you've got, let's say we've got U.S. relatives trying to send care packages or communications to Ukraine. They're not all getting mail depending on where they are and the condition of the community. And so that get to go to the post office and mail something with a stamp is really a miraculous thing in certain instances. And so is it always just a option to, or a need, I guess I should say, to trace back your have-tos until you get to a place where you really understand the get-to and what a blessing that is?
I think it's a great process. I never had, sometimes when you just do things, you don't understand how to get through the process. But the process of going back through the steps until it's gratitude is a fantastic thing to think about. Where my mind instantly goes with mail is I've had kids and my now wife who live overseas. My son is currently in an Asian country called Bhutan. An envelope and a stamp doesn't do it. I'll never forget sending my now wife, when we were courting, a letter for her birthday. And she didn't get it on her birthday. I had sent it first class, 2 weeks before, thinking, well, mail gets everywhere in the world by 2 weeks right now.
Not so much.
I went down there on December 5th of that year. While I was there, the letter arrived.
Wow.
And I was sitting there thinking, she probably doesn't even believe that I actually sent it.
That's amazing.
So you think about the fact that we can actually put a letter and a stamp on a mail to a local vendor and have it get there in the next week. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So, yes, in the extreme situation in Ukraine right now, my goodness, the fact that we can even send mail.
Yeah.
The fact that we can have an interaction with an accountant, the fact that we can even think about things like paying taxes and going to work so that we get to pay taxes.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. I grouse about my taxes. I grouse how high the percentage is, but quite frankly, we have a lower percentage than many countries in taxes. And if I am paying taxes, that means I at least had income that year.
Yeah.
So I get to write that check, right? And so I think you're right. I think you kind of have to go back to the place where you should be grateful for the things that lead to, or the consequences of, having to do something.
Yeah. And I think we've touched on this briefly before, but just that word consequence instantly connotates a negative.
No.
Well, I'm saying, at least from my perspective, I've always heard consequence associated in a negative way. That the consequence of not performing an action or performing an action incorrectly, there's a consequence. It's a negative. But to your point, it is the result of something done or not done, right? It's just the byproduct. So the consequence of going to baseball practice is you can play in the game.
That's right.
The consequence of, picking up the mess in the backyard after the dog is that you don't step in it inadvertently when you're out next time trying to, go out and enjoy the backyard. I'm maybe making a little bit of an extreme case, but I think that what you're getting at is we really have the opportunity to check the way that we're thinking, check the way that we are even approaching a task, a good task or a bad task in our mind, and go back to the point where we can say, you know what, this really is something that I need to be grateful for, because it's something that I've got access to that much of the world doesn't.
Yeah, and even if it's tasks that you don't like to do, the administrative part of your life, and in my book, my first thing most days is admin, and quite frankly, I should call it adulting, which is a word my kids taught me, which I think is ironic. But anyway, because I don't like admin. I don't like to do those kinds of things. I want to be the visionary. I want to be in a great conversation with thought leaders about the future of energy. I don't want to have to fill out an expense report.
Right.
Right? But I want to go to the conference.
Right.
And so therefore I get to fill out my expense report. And again, it's not to be trite and it's not to be overused, but we often tell ourselves, oh man, why do I have to do this? And begrudge. If you're going to do the task anyway, the attitude in which you approach that task makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not only in the completion of that task, which is my big problem. I tend to procrastinate things I don't want to do, but also in the quality of the completion of the task, the consequence of the task, and the fact that you get to do the other thing because of the ongoing performance of those tasks. And I'm watching this series right now called Yellowstone on television, and the guy takes in this kid who just has nowhere to go and starts him out, mucking stables. And, there's not a whole lot of jobs worse than mucking stables. And he goes, let me tell you a trick. He says, the trick is you don't deserve it. You don't deserve this. And he says, and he says, oh, I get it. And you don't deserve what you do. And you don't, right? It's not whether you deserve it or not. These are tasks that need to be done. I get to do these tasks. Eventually, maybe this will lead to other tasks that I want, et cetera, et cetera. But, those tasks have to be done by someone.
Yeah.
Why are we above that? One of the things that you always want to do, my oldest daughter wanted a horse at one point, right? And I said, no problem, I know exactly what to do. You get to go and take care of a horse, and a local friend had some stables. And I said, after a month, right, and you understand exactly what taking care of a horse is, you can have a horse. And I knew what would happen.
Yeah.
And we never got her a horse, right? She
Well,
liked to
your
ride
backyard's a
horses.
little small for the horse too.
She liked to ride horses, but she didn't like the consequence of
Right.
all the work that has to go along with a horse.
Right.
And you can't just go visit a horse once a week. It takes daily attention for a horse.
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of things that, my mom used to say, you pick up one end of the stick, you pick up the other, right? There's always this and that go together. They're part of the same stick. And so if you're going to pick it up, you pick it all up.
All right. So let's do some practical, application exercises, whatever we want to refer to it, for those people in the workforce that are really struggling through some negative mentality. Maybe a huge percentage of their task list in the workplace are, previously have tos that they're trying to convert to get tos. How do we really begin to have that spirit of curiosity about doing that backtrack, getting to a place of finding gratitude? How do we make that a practice and exercise as we go about our daily routine, so that at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future, the rigorous or the monotonous activity turns into something a little bit more joy-filled?
There was a guy who owned an office supply company one time, who, I one time asked the question, I don't know how this came up, I said, so you're really passionate about office supplies? And he goes, office supplies? I hate office supplies. Do you think I care about paper clips and staples? He says, no, my job is not about paper clips and staples. My job is to enable other people and businesses to do their job. And I actually enjoy doing that. I enjoy facilitating other people getting to do their work by supplying them with the things they need to do it. And I thought, what a great perspective.
Yeah.
And this guy truly loved his business. And you can say, well, he's the owner of a business, of course he loves it. People who say that have never owned a business. I mean, I used to tell people in entrepreneur courses that I used to teach, it's like, so you really want to be your own boss, right? Oh yeah, the people who run my business are terrible, and if I did it my way, it would all work. Okay, so you want to go from one boss to everybody being your boss, because your employees are going to be your boss, your customers are going to be your boss, the government's now going to be your boss. And people don't realize that you always are going to have a boss. And you may not like the way the boss handles things, but you know what? Everybody's on their own journey and they're doing their own thing. And who cares what they do? Your boss's influence on you can be this much or this much.
Right.
How much are you going to let it? Even if you're doing the most menial tasks, I say that tongue in cheek, you still get to work with people, or you get to work with whatever your chosen profession is. You get to work with numbers, you get to work with things, you get to do those things. Concentrate on that. And yes, the old trite thing is, concentrate on doing the best job ever and always outwork everybody around you. Because if you do that, you will always be valued and be the person that people go to. And whether or not you want to climb the ladder is immaterial at that point. Because people will enjoy being around you, because they don't have to manage you, they don't have to supervise you, they don't have to worry about you. That is such a blessing to everybody around you.
Yeah.
Nobody has to worry about whether you're pulling your weight, whether you're participating, whether you're making customers happy, because you're doing the best you can. The other part of that is, the relationships with the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
How much fun is it to think about the relationships with the people around you and how you can constantly improve those relationships by finding out what it is that they need and helping them achieve it. You can do that from any position.
Yeah. All right, so let's bring this conversation back home, and let's say there's a caregiving situation where there's been an injury, an illness, something that's happened, and the get to versus the have to mentality in doing some of the care tasks that are very unpleasant or very uncomfortable, or very even demeaning in some cases, for the person maybe even receiving the care. And I know that you know this world very well from being in the home healthcare field. How do we have this conversation? How do we be curious about shifting mentality when there's been something that has just drastically changed relationship, a stroke or an amputation or some degree of incapacitation?
Well, first of all, let me just say that caregivers and caretakers have my utmost respect. I think it's the hardest job in the world, and I always tell people, put your mask on first. I mean, this is the thing about when the airlines say put your mask on first, it's not because you love yourself more than your child. It's if you try to help out your child and you can't breathe, eventually you won't be able to help out your child, and that's why they say that. And I say that to caregivers because in order to breathe out, in order to give, you have to breathe in. You have to have something to give before you can give it. So you have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of that other person. The other thing about that is if you're hungry, angry, and only tired, you're not only gonna not do your job well and not be good at it and be frustrated with it, but it's gonna hurt the relationship with the person that you're trying to take care of. That never ends up well. So the number one thing you have to do, and this is easier said than done, it's much easier to say this in a podcast than to actually do it. And I've done this. The reason I started the home care business is because of a situation with my own mother where I was doing that very same thing. And I can tell you that you've got to take care of yourself and you've got to give yourself space, no matter what that happens. If you're in the situation where you're the only caretaker for someone, you need to figure out that situation. There has to be a backup plan. There's going to be a day when you're sick. There's going to be a day when you need to go do something else. You've got to figure out a way to have that happen, whether it's another sibling in the family, whether it's another family member, whether it's the neighbor next door. You have to have some way, because actually just having that backup will give you some peace of mind that there's a light at the end of the tunnel and a way to take a break if necessary. My wife and I used to do respite foster care, and that is not taking in a kid and taking them for months or years. It is providing respite for the foster parents who are doing it, because there's many saints out there who take in kids who are not their own and take care of them when the kid has nowhere else to go. And what we would do is take those kids for the weekend so that a couple could go and take care of themselves for the weekend. So I'm a big advocate for taking care of yourself first so that you can take care of others. And thank you for your service. So that's, now, get to versus have to. When you get to be part of a family, there's a consequence to that. And you just said earlier, it seems like it's a bad word. There's a positive consequence to that. Without family, without a tribe, without people who have to like you, well, they don't have to like you, they have to love you just because you're family. There's nothing like that. And that's important. And that means there's going to be good times and bad times. And in the bad times, we have to rally. We get to rally. Because if we didn't rally, it's not a family.
So I can imagine somebody sitting in their car listening to this podcast yelling at us from the other side and saying, you have no idea what my life is like. I'm changing diapers, I'm dealing with feeding tubes, I'm dealing with wound care, fill in the blank. These are things I have to do. It's disrupted my life, it's disrupted my future. I have no peace, I have no joy, fill in the blank. How do we help somebody in that situation transition from have to get to, in not a Pollyanna-ish mentality, in a genuine way that this can be something to say, okay, I want to backtrack to see the positive. I want to find where my get to can begin in a genuine place so that it helps me in the day-to-day.
Sure. Well, and many times it may have to go back to the fact that this person took care of you at some point in your life, and you're returning the favor, and understanding that that person's choice is not to be in that situation either. And then, as I said, making sure that you can somehow take care of yourself, even if it's being able to talk to somebody at the phone at the end of the day and tell them how much your life sucks. You know, the language is important, and there's some positive self-talk that can be had, but I understand that it may take a while to get to that, right? You need someone who's going to listen to you and be able to not relate. Nobody can relate to your particular situation, but at least be empathetic to it. In other words, that has got to be hard. I can't imagine doing that. Man, you must be going through a lot. And finding those people, and finding a support group, an advisory group, a support group that you can surround yourself with, that can, at minimum, take care of you psychologically, and then eventually physically and materially, and be that backup.
I would imagine, and I've not been in this situation for any long period of time. I've been a respite caregiver at times for grandparents, etc., but I've not been in it in the trenches day to day. But I would imagine one of the things that maybe could be a starting point for a mental shift is I get to preserve some degree of dignity for my loved one. Because if it's not you, if it's a hired person that's coming in, that individual has way less care about the dignity of the one who's in need, right? They don't necessarily care about their privacy, they don't care about their modesty, they don't necessarily care about X, Y, and Z, but you as the caregiver get to help preserve the modesty and the dignity of the person whom you're serving.
Sure. Now, I will tell you this, and this is how we used to hire caregivers. We had over 200 of them at one point. We hired them for their servant heart. We hired people who actually really enjoyed doing that for other people. And those people are out there. Just like there's some people who enjoy accounting and paperwork, right? I do not. And that's part of understanding your strengths, and understanding that there's a time and a season where your strengths are going to have to be put to something. Knowing that there are other people who actually enjoy doing those things, and at some point there hopefully or is an opportunity that you can create to have other people come in and help in that situation that do enjoy that. And you know, a simple example of that is whenever I started a company, the first person I hired was somebody who was going to run the QuickBooks, right? I cannot, that program is meant to be intuitive, and I'm sure it is to people who are numbers crunchers. It's a program from hell for me. I just don't understand it, don't like it as an engineer. I can't do it. So the first thing I do is hire that. So it goes back to that 70-30. You ought to be going for as much as possible. 70% of the things that you're doing are in your strengths, are things that you are good at, and that you can do with some ease, and actually the time goes by and you can get in a zone and just do them. And 30% is going to be those things like the paperwork and the things that you don't like to do but are necessary, and you get to do them so that you can have the 70%. Now, having said that, we find ourselves lopsided of that frequently, especially in the situation you're talking about.
Sure.
But proactively, and you know, people say, well, I don't have time to be proactive. You know, one big wave hits me, and then another wave, and then another wave, and I don't have. But you know, even firemen who came up with smoke detectors, right, were proactive in coming up with smoke detectors. You know, any little bit of time you have, you need to use towards being creative and figuring out how to structure what you're doing on a daily basis, because everything you do is your work, from relationships outside of 8 to 5 to 8 to 5. That's my paradigm. But what can you do to restructure your work to do things that are benefiting people in a way that you can be encouraged by?
So I think this is a good place to kind of wrap up for today. But I think ultimately the question that we throw out for all of you listening is, Can you be curious enough to ask that question about what would happen in your life if you transition the have to mentality to the get to mentality, to throw out the judgment associated with the menial tasks that you're tired of or that are very unpleasant to you? And could there actually be a transition in the way that you operate in the day-to-day and even in your joy level by transitioning that one word of have into get? So let us know. Think about it. Try it out for a week. Give us some feedback. Would love to hear from you. It's very easy to get in touch with us. curiositynotjudgment.com. There's a contact us box right there. And of course, you're always welcome to leave a comment in the appropriate channels wherever you find us on this platform. So thank you so much again for your time and attention, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.